our time with beauty is so ubiquitous in terms of product design, computer design. There is something. The aesthetic is more than ever really present in our everyday life. Yet it has really removed us as well from its significance in a certain way. And so, by that I mean that something beautiful can be a way of camouflaging conflict, can be a way of also camouflaging a certain indifference to the political will that really would allow us to aspire to the aesthetic. And I think in that sense, I really agree with you and when you said, let's just begin to speak of a process by which we can make decisions in terms of how beauty can really ultimately have an impact. I'm thinking, of course, of how some of the projects that we tend to admire a lot, let's say, a lot has been written, for example, about Haussmann's Paris, while the project of beautification was ultimately a project of militarization in a certain way. The width of boulevards were designed not only to allow the kind of perspectival effect of visuality and hygiene, let's say, in terms of the relationship to an environment that was a lot more airy and open, but at the same time, that width of that boulevard was calculated so that insurgents wouldn't barricade. It would take them a long time to barricade. I'm thinking of how our projects of revitalization in every city in the world have been pursued out of a project of beautification, but in so doing camouflaging the most pressing problems of the city, having to do with economic and social, the gap, let's say, between enclaves of wealth and enclaves or sectors of necessity. I'm thinking that why is it that I find more beauty in some of the Tijuana's shanty towns than in some of the luxury condos that really make our downtown? I'm thinking that there is a more complicated aspect of beauty that has to do with the ruined, with the worn, with the used, with the everyday type of interface that we have with our environment. I work in neighborhoods like San Isidro, where when we begin to talk about the built environment, everybody wants to begin talking about how buildings look like, in what style should we build, what is the facade of this building. Never really a relationship of we as individuals in our own environment. So when I've worked in San Isidro in workshops with the nonprofit organization I work with, Casa Familiar, we've tried to reorient the discussion from style, aesthetics, beauty in that sense, and more in opening up a conversation about, again, the relationship of people to the spaces themselves. And we begin to find that in San Isidro, places impacted by immigrants, immigrants begin to encroach into property in a way that is very interesting, building illegal additions, negotiating property lines to share resources, using alleys for informal economies. So all of those transactions with space and with boundaries and with people are also an aesthetic act. And I think that that also begins to reorient us from a very different idea of beauty, which so far has been just really used by developers as a way of packaging identity and so on. So I'm interested in the kind of opening up of the concept of beauty so that it begins to get to that level of decision by which we reorient completely our pedagogy, our education towards beauty. How can we expect an elementary school child to talk about beauty when they are just tested out of multiple choice questionnaires, when there is not an ability to relate to the world through associations and relationships into the built environment? So I think that this is a larger question, and I'm sorry I'm going back and forth in terms of issues, but let's speak of a more complex understanding of beauty that is not reduced to facades, to aesthetic and projects of beautification.
Very, very